get to the Rude Guest Hotline. Rude, the most reliable heating and air conditioning products in the DMV. Ben Standig of The Athletic stopping by post Commanders draft. Before we get to that, what did you make of yesterday's big announcement, and do you think that this is going to happen, or are we going the way of Leonsis in Virginia?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously things have been, incrementally moving in this direction, and, we got a heads up a week or so ago that something may be happening imminently, and here we are. To me, go back to 18 months, 2 years, and it all came down to would the DC Council spend the money, and that was even before they gave $500 million to Monumental Sports for their refurbishing. So, we'll see how stern those who are opposing giving out the money are with this. I mean, the fact that it is now here, that isn't just a hypothetical, that there's a deal on the table, that the Commanders are ready to go. Maybe that changes some minds of people who would have been against it because, it was like, I'm not for this thing, but now it's here to get an NFL team, to get a new stadium that would obviously be a centerpiece for this city to attract other events. That's got to be tempting. I would imagine that somehow this ultimately gets done, but my guess is it's not going to be a straight line from yesterday's announcement to that moment.
Yeah, it never is. As far as the draft goes, more surprising to you, not a single trade back or not taking a single pass rusher off the edge?
Probably not a trade back, but once they got through the first two picks, those are their best opportunities to get some viable picks. The strength of this draft was in those middle rounds. It wasn't like a top tier, a really strong top tier, and that the next few rounds kind of like leveled out. That you get good value in rounds 3 and 4 at least. So I think once they were in a position where they weren't going to get extra picks there, it's probably when it was like, okay, well, we're just going to move forward here and take these picks. Obviously, we talked a ton about edge rusher. You would have guessed that would have been the case, but for me, my view of this whole draft was they don't have to do anything they don't want to do because in free agency they largely covered up any kind of issues. I'm not saying that they're good they're good enough at edge rusher. I don't know if I think that at all, but especially like if we get to the postseason, they don't have youth, they don't have athleticism, they don't have an obvious guy who's going to go out and get 8+ sacks, but they should be better against the run, and they have 5 or 6 guys that you could say, hey, these can be part of a rotation. We'll see if they do any in free agency. So yeah, a little surprised, but again, it's not like the picks that they made were wacky or anything. They also addressed areas where we said they needed some help. So something had to give, and depending how you want to look at it, unfortunately they didn't get the edge guy.
So it sounds to me like you would not be stunned if they didn't still sign a veteran edge. I think it's a foregone conclusion that they've still got to go out and pick your guy. I mean, Judon or Preston Smith or whoever, at least one of those guys. But you think they could just go into the season with what they've got on the roster now?
Well, I mean, all the guys that are out there for the most part, unless there's just some kind of, deep undercover guy that I just don't know anything about. But in terms of the headliners, like the guys you just mentioned, the Darius Smith as well, all those guys are, over 30 as well. This team needs to get younger. That's not going to do that. Now, does that help them more potentially this year? Yeah, sure. I mean, the Darius Smith, just to use him, had 9.5 sacks last year. That's more than anybody else on this team had. I'm sure other teams around the league will be knocking on his door as well. But unless they think that one of these guys is going to be viable enough to be sort of top 3 in a rotation, can help against the run, give them some pass rush. I'm not saying it's that they wouldn't. I'm just saying I don't know that it's they've got to do it. Darius Smith for me is kind of the line after him. I don't know that it really. I don't know that anybody necessarily moves the needle based on where they are in their careers and things like that.
I guess I just don't look at their edges and see anyone you'd be blocking that would be really good if you brought someone in here. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, they drafted in the 7th round, got hurt last year. Maybe they like him. Jalen Holmes flashed a bit. I mean, Andre Jones, I think, is on the team or he isn't, and I don't know how much of a difference that makes. Jacob Martin in his career is not really proven to be a pass rusher. So for me, they just don't have it. Like Cleveland Farrell, Dietrich Wise, those guys play the run okay, maybe, but it just seems like they've got to do something, especially coming out of the draft. I thought they might draft a kicker as an example. They don't do it, and then today they sign Matt Gay. It feels to me like it's just kind of that same thing where now they go back to the drawing board and they throw money at somebody, whether it's Zadarius Smith or somebody else, and say, we need someone who can get us 8 sacks opposite Dorrance Armstrong on passing downs.
I mean, yeah, I agree that would be ideal. I'm just saying, based on what I see out there, Matthew Judon had 5 sacks last year. Von Miller had 6. I'm not going to pretend I've gone back to watch all their tape. Sacks are not always a good indicator of how effective somebody was. But, the old story, if they were really good to be a difference maker, they probably would be already on a team by now. Of course, teams at a certain point in the free agency process, they wait till post-draft. So a signing doesn't account against the compensatory pick calculation. So that's why some players are still available. But again, look, they could go out and sign with these guys. I get it, but I guess I'm just saying that even if they did, for the most part, I wouldn't be thinking to myself, "Wow, they really fixed this problem." I just think that maybe they do, maybe they don't. Like I said, they've got 6 guys you could argue would be on the team or could be, and again, Zadarius Smith aside, I'm happy to admit if I'm missing somebody, but just in terms of the sort of the obvious names, I don't know that they necessarily, change much for me, whether they do sign them or not.
Ben Standig of The Athletic on Grant and Danny looking at the draft class. Trey Amos in the 2nd round. Would he start possibly after a competition? Is that the plan, that he'd be a boundary corner? You'd have him and Lattimore and kick Sanders still into the nickel, which was the original plan? Or did they see enough from Mikey outside that maybe he plays out there?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's a really fascinating question. Going back to the original, when they originally drafted Sanders, he was going to be the slot guy, and he was ready for that. They were talking about that, and then I don't think they wanted to move him outside. But as we remember, the other cornerbacks were just falling apart all over the place, and even when they got Lattimore, he's hurt, so he didn't play for a bit, and Sanders still did a good job. And I was talking to somebody with another team before the draft, and they were like, look, generally speaking, if you've got a slot corner who can play outside, you don't move him back to the slot. So, look, they needed more size on the perimeter anyway. They needed more depth anyway. And, Sanders still is the only one you could have said for sure would be on the roster in 2026. So, if nothing else, they do have, another piece there for the longer haul. But, yeah, Amos is going to be an outside guy. If he can come in and be a contributor right away, then moving Sanders still back to slot to me would make a ton of sense. They also have, Jonathan Jones, who can play either outside or inside. He's, there's a lot to like about him, the veteran experience. He's tough against the run, even though he's not the biggest guy. So, and then you got Noah Igbenogany, who obviously was pretty good last year in the slot. So not to punt the question and be like, hey, I got options, but it is kind of like that. To me, it would be, what do I want to do with Sanders still long term? If I want him to be outside, then he'll be on the outside, and I'll have Amos maybe next year if Lattimore is gone. But if they want him to be in the slot, then move him to the slot. I just don't want him necessarily moving around a ton in terms of learning positions. Obviously you can be flexible, but what is he going to be? That's going to be the question. And I would think this is a sign that it's a slot, but we'll see.
They took Jalen Lane out of Virginia Tech, the wide receiver, in the 4th round at 128 overall. How much do you see him figuring into their offense, and do you think he'll be their punt and maybe kick returner?
Yeah, I think that the fact that he can do both, return, it'd be a factor in the return game and on offense, is why you make a move like that. Their top 2 returners last year is Zacchaeus and Crowder. One is signed elsewhere, and the other one's not on the team. So I think that's got to be a huge factor. Adding speed on offense to me was really critical. I didn't so much care if it was a running back or receiver. It needed to be from somewhere. They did it with a receiver. Guys can run a 4.34 40 time. It looked like Virginia Tech got him the ball a lot, sort of quick screens and slants, and just get him the ball in space as best you can and let him go from there. And Cliff Kingsbury, I think, can design that. So I don't think he's going to be frontline receiver snaps, barring injury, or he just comes in and crushes it, because they have some other guys. But again, you look long term. Well, even if we assume that Terry McLaurin signs an extension, the only other receiver they had beyond this season is Luke McCaffrey. So they've given themselves a potential future slot, and if he's able to come in right away and show he can help on offense, then you put that 4.34 speed somewhere on the field and get going.
Do you feel pretty confident that McLaurin gets extended at some point around the start of training camp?
I would be surprised if he's not back. I mean, unless the money talk is just out of whack, I would imagine they find somewhere, some way to get this done. Obviously, what he did on the field last year, on top of his entire career, was very impressive. The leadership and all that. And look, the majority of the moves that have been made this offseason have been connected in by one thing, or by one mindset, and that is help Jaden Daniels. And taking Terry McLaurin away from him from the long haul would not be wise in that front. So I would assume they get something done. And if you're not going to somehow pay Terry McLaurin, then what kind of message is that sending to everybody else? He's literally the poster child for what you want out of a leader, a teammate, a player. So I would be surprised if it's not done. Whether it's training camp or OTAs, we remember in the last time he was up for a deal, he did miss some of the the early part of the offseason workout because of it wasn't wholly out, but it was voluntary. So you'd like to think he'd get there and participate, but we'll see.
Ben Standig of The Athletic. They take Josh Connerly at 29 overall. You actually, on the show before the draft, told us you wouldn't be surprised if they went tackle. So kudos to you. You were thinking outside the box a little bit there. But walk me through your projection for the starting offensive line at this point.
Yeah, I mean, similar to the cornerback situation like we just discussed, I think the offensive line could be really fascinating. I'm going to assume that Connerly has the inside track to get the right tackle job. It's always he played left side in college. For offensive linemen in recent years, the transition from college to pro is a lot trickier than it has been in years past, just because of the way offenses are in college and what they ask linemen to do. But if he's able to make that transition, if he's able to show something in camp that they feel confident putting him out there, then he's the right tackle. And then I think what becomes interesting is, what do they do with Brandon Coleman? To me, I would look to see about putting Brandon Coleman on the left side, put him in competition with Nick Allegretti. I don't want to keep having Coleman move all over the place. If somehow Coleman were to beat out Connerly for the right tackle job, that would be surprising to me. But let's just, maybe that happens. But ultimately, he's going to land at guard. Ultimately, Connerly is going to get that job. And so I would just assume have Coleman be on the left side. Cosby's on the right side eventually. You can have Andrew Wiley or Nate Herbig be that fill-in at right guard. Or if Coleman were to win the left guard spot, you can move Allegretti over. I'm not knocking Allegretti, but the move isn't just about, right? It's not just about upgrading right tackle. It's about now moving Coleman somewhere else, because obviously he was a third-round pick and he showed some good promise, and a lot of people thought he'd be better off at guard anyway. So I think that, to me, is going to be really fascinating. Do they give Coleman and Wiley real shot to be at right tackle, or do they just kind of quickly say, hey, we'd like to see what you guys can do at guard as much as anything, and go from there? But yeah, I mean, I think Tunsil, Coleman or Allegretti at left guard, Biotish, Cosme, but with a fill-in until he's back, and then Connerly. That, to me, would be the best guess as to what a week one lineup looks like.
Ben's cranking out good content and has a lot of intel on this draft class. Depth chart analysis that he posted was really good over the weekend as well. So go check him out at The Athletic, worth a subscription. Benjamin, thank you, sir. As always, we appreciate you.
Grant, time flies by when I'm talking to you. Appreciate it, man. Thanks.
You got it, brother. That's Ben Standig of The Athletic.